I'm Jill Fermanovsky. My parents came from Africa with me when I was about 11, me and my brother, and much to my horror really, because I came from a small town in Africa to the big city, and I was a bit miserable for a while, but what was great was it was the mid-60s and the Beatles were kind of had taken off, and the swinging 60s had begun, and that was a kind of compensation being around in that time.
Was that quite a shock for you as well? When you first moved to London, you had all this activity going on around you. Coming from Africa, was it quite a culture shock?
Oh, tremendous, yeah. Culture shock, weather shock, people shock. I was shocked. Yeah.
Because you started off at Central St Martin's as well, and that's renowned now for being the place for like emerging artists and stuff. Was it as cool as it was now as it is then?
I think, yeah. In fact, one of the most intriguing things about art school in this country, and it had to be spotted by foreigners to see, is the connection, the strong connection between art school and rock and roll. In fact, it's quite extraordinary, and I was aware of it even when I was young. I knew that John Lennon had gone to art school. Then there was like the Roxy Music people came up in the 60s, they'd gone to art school, and so it went on, and you sort of thought, well, if they were at art school and they did music, maybe that's a good idea. And I was quite good at art, so I thought, I'm heading for art school as well, and it was very cool to go to art school. In fact, Joe Strummer from The Clash was there, Lena Lovitch was there, so in fact they all went on to do their music careers, but at that time they were just in foundation course, or they were just hanging about really. So, but I mean, within 3 months of arriving and doing it, I did that 2-week photography course, and my fate was sealed.
That was it. And I also believe that your first shot was of Paul McCartney, and as a fangirl, how did you kind of remove yourself from the fangirl to be the photographer when you photographed Paul McCartney?
I don't think that I don't think I was a photographer or enough of a kind of maniac to do either very well. I was just used to hang out. This is before art school. I was 14 or something, and the Beatles were recording in Abbey Road, and McCartney lived around the corner. We all knew where he lived because in those days they go, oh yeah, Paul's moved, and this is his new address, and you get that kind of information in the Beatle Monthly magazine. Yeah. And the Beatle Monthly magazine also had great pictures in it, and we knew also the Beatles liked photography. Paul, you'd often see Paul with a camera and stuff. So I used to just have my dad's Instamatic. I had an Instamatic. My dad had a camera, and I one day went outside Paul's house, and he came out, and I photographed him with my 2 school friends. But I didn't want to be in the picture. That's what was interesting. Yeah. I didn't want to be in the picture. I just wanted to take a picture.
That is interesting as well, because as a fan, you'd want to be in the picture going, look who I was next to. Yeah. What made you want to step behind the camera instead of being in front of it at that time?
I think I was just very shy. Very, very shy. And the other thing is that it didn't come so much to the fore then, but my father had been an amateur photographer. Right. A very, very fine one, and when I was really little he had a darkroom at home. So I used to watch him print and stuff like that, and to me it was magic actually, you know, it still is actually, but to a little girl, you know, it was very easy to go, now look, there's a white piece of paper, and then in a minute it's going to go abracadabra, and so for me photography's always had this mystique. And then the other thing is that when I actually discovered the camera, or rediscovered it at college when I was 18, it gave me a lot of courage. You know, I was very, very shy.
And you were quite a jack of all trades really, weren't you? Because you did textiles, graphic design, charcoal prints, photography. Why was photography your specialist at the end of the day?
I think it was 2 things really. I had the basic interest that it really almost organically come from my father. You know, I'd seen the magic of darkroom printing and negatives and all that sort of thing. It remained with me as a sort of a magical thing in the back. Then as a foreigner here, the camera helped me a bit with my shyness, you know, the picture of the Beatles, and I'd go on holiday and take pictures. And when you've got a camera, then people, you've got something to do with your hands. Yeah. So that's really, you know, even that. But more particularly, that 2-week course that we did, the first roll of film was in fact a colour roll. They gave everybody a Pentax Spotmatic, a roll of transparency films to make sure you get your exposure right, you had to shoot 36 frames. You handed it in at the end of the day. The next day, they had a slideshow, talked through it. And I was just completely mesmerised from the very first moment. And also, I took 2 or 3 fantastically good shots. And I think that beginner's luck and the teacher going, wow, look at that class, really blew me away. And that was followed a week later by this job at the Rainbow.
Gosh.
So, I mean, it really was a momentous thing. And I think the Rainbow thing was all to do with my love of music and wanting to somehow get involved with music. And I didn't know how to do that. I thought maybe I should be a writer, or maybe I could, I was trying to find a way into music.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do. And there it was, it came to me on a plate.
So how was it moving from the 2-week course to your first job? How did that come about?
Oh, right, well, it was only a week
Yeah.
later, I know. It's amazing.
What an
isn't it?
experience.
Yeah. Wasn't really a job because I wasn't paid. It didn't get me £7 that time. No, I had this, the first week at college, the first day you did the colour roll, the second day you did a black and white roll, and then the third day you learned how to process it. The fourth day you did a contact sheet, you did like a thing of printing. Then there was the 5th day of shooting another roll of film. And over the 5th day you had another roll of film they gave you, and then it was the weekend, so it was like the Friday. And I went to the Rainbow Theatre to a gig. And I thought, right, I'll take that camera with me. I had the long lens, and I had that roll of film. And my friends who'd bought the tickets, it was this group, Yes. It was sort of a prog group. Yeah. And we were in the balcony, the top. And so before the gig, I'm looking, through the lens, thinking, well, I'll focus there and I'll do that. And I was thinking, oh, well, some photographers were arriving. Obviously, they're professionals.
Yeah.
And they went down the aisle. In fact, I think the pit, there is a pit there, but I think they weren't using it that day because Yes maybe had something going on in that pit area of lights or something. So, but so they were going down the aisle and they were sort of congregating there. And then the gig began and I started to shoot a couple of frames and I thought, it'd be better down there, I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I went down there. I thought, well, this is a pretty professional looking camera. Now, in those days, there weren't, you either had a professional camera or you had an amateur one. An amateur one was an Instamatic, wasn't it? A professional one had a lens and looked chunky. I had the professional one. So I thought, if I go down, so I said to my friends, I'm going to go and try and go down there. And I'm like, all right. And so I went down, I remember coming down the balcony, of course it was empty then, going into the auditorium. I thought, if I go through, and I marched along and people saw the camera and then nobody stopped me and I just went marching down the aisle. I thought, fucking hell,
get away with this.
Bottom, and thought, right, well, that's better. And started to shoot. And I only had one roll, so I finished it. And then at the end of the gig, I was pretty ecstatic. There were these photographers there, and they were packing up, and one of them said to me something like, "Oh, are you professional?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." He said, "That's good." He said, "Because I work here." He said, "Me and my mate, we do pictures for the theatre, publicity pictures and things. But we're going off to make a film, and we're just thinking we should get replacement. Is that of interest to you?" I said, "Oh yeah, no problem." I don't know what. So I said, "Yeah, that's cool." Oh, he said, "Okay, so give me a call." Anyway, that was how it began.
Yeah.
And then I wrote in my diary, I think I'm going to get into hot water because I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't even done the first week course. But I think when I said yes to that question, are you professional? I thought, yes, I'm going to be.
Yeah.
And I am. And that was the ruin of me, really, after that, because, I just, with that pass, which said all areas and a picture on it, I could do whatever I liked.
That must have felt so good to have that freedom as well. Just
incredible. And I was a huge Floyd fan. I'd become a Floyd fan by this time. And they were rehearsing in there about 2 weeks later.
Did you have those pinch me moments when you were there in the dressing room going, this is actually happening?
Yeah.
What were you thinking at that time?
No, I just thought, oh, this is, this is it. This is as great as as good as it gets, really. And it wasn't even just so much being in the dressing room; it was being able to go every night to the gigs. To be able to go 3 times. I mean, it was expensive. As a student, you didn't have any money. I was at college anyway. I was at college for 3 years.
Amazing. So where did the progression go from the Yes gig up until the current day, because it's just kind of snowballed, hasn't it? Like the amount of people that you photograph, like Bob Marley, Pink Floyd, the Beatles.
I wasn't very secure about that I was much of a good photographer, to tell you the truth. I didn't really have very good equipment for starters. That S1A was all right. I never had a Nikon till much later. So I was working with cheap cameras, not very good lenses, not fast lenses, no zoom lenses. Winging it, really, and not feeling that I was terribly good. And I remember also a big barrier was the music press, which was all male dominated. In fact, I had a cover, 1972, with The Who, of Melody Maker. It was my first cover. I was beside myself again, because there was a newsagent, you know, one of the ones in the street across the road from college, and my cover was on the bloody newsstand, and I just stood there on the corner just looking at it.
Did you know that it made the cover?
I think I didn't know until it was there, but it didn't have a credit. Why? Because Ray Coleman, who was the editor, said, "Oh no, you'll get one when you deserve one." I mean, that was his sort of, we've got our photographers. Now, I don't know whether it was them protecting their territory, the photographers, or they just thought, well, or they forgot, I don't know, but for me it was awful that I didn't get a credit. And I said, "Look, I've had a cover now, I want a credit." And I went, "No, you'll get one when you deserve one." I remember him saying that.
How is the transition going from live photography to the personal portraits that you do?
Exactly, that's absolutely a good question, because for 3 years I only did live shots, really, more or less. But then 1974, when I was working for Melody Maker, one of their regulars was ill, and there was an opportunity to shoot Stevie Wonder in a hotel. Oh my gosh. And I was terrified, because first of all, technically, and I got the live shots sussed now, but shooting in a hotel room and poor lighting, and what could you ask, would I have to speak to him? I just didn't know what to do, but I went, and that was my first shoot with Stevie Wonder.
Gosh.
And I mean, I got through it, and I did the pictures. They were all right, not great, but the extraordinary thing about that was when I realised, because he was a big hero, was that I was more overwhelmed in the end, in his actual presence, by his blindness than by his greatness as an artist, because it was like there was this blind man, and he was like, you know, somebody had to walk him, and then listening to him on the phone. He was really good with accents, and how he stood and the way he sort of waved himself around, which probably helped, and his feeling for music. He was sort of plugged into his tape recorders and touching things on, what's that, and then could somebody take me to the loo, you know. That's what was, I remember thinking, wow, he's blind, yeah. Remember that kind of photography, that's what we did actually, and it was a good transition. You went to the gig, you did the gig, then you went with the journalist. Journalists were king, we were snappers. Okay, we hadn't got any status at this point, we were snappers. So the journalist went, you went with the journalist, they took their like you. A snapper was there, shooting a profile shot with a microphone, or occasionally that shot, but not looking at the camera. There wasn't time set aside for the photographer till the 80s.
Gosh.
When the face came, and suddenly they realised, hang on a minute, better to have a decent picture than an interview. Absolutely. And the journalist was like out of the way, and the photographer was given their time. But that took 8 years.
Gosh. And that must have been quite a privilege to have that time as a photographer as well, with these big artists.
Yeah, but that's other challenges then. You had to talk to them, you had to tell them what to do. Didn't come terribly easily to me, I can assure you. No, I didn't. It took a lot of time. And when I finally got my studio, that's when I sussed. But that was in the 80s, yeah.
And how is it shooting people like Amy Winehouse and Bob Marley that you've worked with and then sadly passed away? Is it quite a weird experience looking back on those images?
There's rather a lot of them.
Yeah.
Get used to it, actually. We used to have the RIP window at Rock Archive, which we probably ought to put back, actually, because there's you know, the era is disappearing, people are disappearing. Some go young, some go old. Yeah, there's a lot. Where do these people go that you lose? Nobody knows, but you retain an essence, and the picture will trigger that for you. Yeah. And I think photography is actually, a lot of it's about holding on. you know.
And
Yeah.
is there a band that's given you the best feedback? What was that band?
I guess it was Oasis, really. That was, of course, much later. But I mean, Oasis, I got involved with them because I'd finally found a publisher for my book, The Moment. I'd had so many rejections, 13 years worth of rejections for that book. It just all kept being rejected. And finally, this publisher said they'd do it. And it was a sort of diary, a career biography, really, from the Beatles to, well, what? I mean, I thought, well, I better finish it with somebody who's up and coming.
Yeah.
And Oasis were good because they were sort of a bit Beatley altogether. I thought that'd be quite nice, it's the synchronicity of that. They were doing well, they'd had a hit or two. I went to find them and I went to a gig, and they were very respectful to me because, of course, I'd worked with all their heroes. Did the gig, couldn't understand what was going on, actually. It was really exciting because there was nothing happening, actually, but there was this power and tension with very little going on. So I was shooting all of that, sent them the pictures, and they said, oh, we like what you do, why don't you come work with us?
Amazing.
And that was the beginning of the next phase of my career, the end of the book and the beginning of...
And what year was that, when you first started with the Oasis?
1994.
Yeah. So that was just at the beginning, really, for them.
They'd started it a couple of years earlier, but they'd taken off really in sort of 94. They'd had a couple of hits, and they'd just recorded their first album. The Diane Arbus, for me, influence came in when I worked with Oasis, because she was really good at showing how weird families were. And that's the brothers, you know, those brothers, that's what intrigued me.
And that's something you kind of forget about Oasis. Obviously they're brothers, but they're a band as well. But at the same time you're shooting them as a band, but still that's their personal life as brothers.
Yeah.
That must be a weird combination as well.
Well, that's what gave them their edge.
Yeah.
That's what it was about, really.
How do you think music photography's changed now then? Do you think that bands are a lot more media trained to what they used to be?
Yeah, of course they are, yeah. And the whole thing is a different game now, really. It has some advantages and some disadvantages, really. Yeah.
What would you say those are?
Well, I think I call it the rock and roll era, which I sort of go on, bang on about it a bit, is finished, you see. But the talent goes on and so on, and the technology changes, so, and that's quite right and healthy. So there was almost a crossover at the end of the last century, really. For me, the Oasis was the crossover for me.
Yeah.
In fact, I was part of that revolution because in 1997 I did this gigantic Oasis exhibition in the Roundhouse called Was There Then? Because they were so famous by then that sponsors wanted to get involved. We got a vast amount of sponsorship money. I mean, would that I just put it in the bank and spend $5,000 on doing a normal exhibition. But I was much more ambitious. I thought, well, an exhibition would be too dull and boring. I'm going to do something really spectacular. And we went into the Roundhouse and took the whole of the Roundhouse. And it was before it was renovated, so it was a vast space, and filled it with Oasis images, some of them, you know, sort of 80 foot long or something. And there was films and projections and holograms and large slides and slideshows and a soundtrack, and it was a multimedia experience.
Wow. What's next for you then? Who was your last commission with?
The Stripes.
Yeah, and that was a few weeks ago, did you say?
Yeah, I was thrilled. They're 17, I'm 60. They wanted me to do their album sleeve. I was thrilled.
So that you get people asking you still then, which is always weird.
Yeah, and I'm a fan still. I'll contact people. Sometimes they don't respond, or they won't let me do stuff, but sometimes they do. I write to somebody and go, I really like your music, or I'll phone the manager and go, I like that artist, can I come? Jacob Banks, I love him. Yeah. So I wrote to I managed to make contact with him, wrote him a fan letter. He wrote me a fan letter back, did some shots with him, just for fun.
Yeah. And looking back on your career, what would you say has been a highlight moment for you?
All of it, really, from that first Rainbow gig onwards. It's not let me down, unlike other things in life that can, but my rock and roll career has been really a very consistent inspiration.